It all started in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where you'd never expect drama, until one HOA board meeting turned everything upside down. A family already going through the heartbreak of having a child hospitalized thought they had enough on their plate. But then came Karen, a strict HOA board member who decided now was the perfect time to start threatening fines over a few small things around their home. Things like a slightly overgrown lawn or a temporary ramp for their child's return from the hospital. Little did Karen know, the community was watching, and they weren't about to stay silent. As tensions grew, what was supposed to be a routine board meeting quickly exploded into something much bigger. Phones started recording. Voices got louder. And before anyone could believe it, police were called to the scene. What happened next didn't just stay within the neighborhood. It went viral, sparking outrage across social media. Was this just a case of a strict HOA board following the rules? Or was it a shocking example of power taken too far against a family in crisis? Stick around, because the footage captured that night tells a story you won't want to miss, and it all leads to a moment that no one at that meeting would ever forget. The family at the center of it all had lived in the neighborhood for years without any problems. They were well-liked, known for being kind and keeping to themselves. But everything changed when their youngest child was hospitalized after a sudden serious illness. With their focus completely on their child's health, a few things around the house naturally slipped. The grass grew a little taller, and a temporary medical ramp was installed at the front door. To most neighbors, it was clear the family needed support, not criticism. But Karen, who had just been voted onto the HOA board, saw things differently. At the next HOA meeting, she showed up with a list of violations, speaking coldly and loudly about community standards, and threatening daily fines if the family didn't make immediate corrections. It didn't seem to matter to her that they were dealing with a crisis. People in the room started whispering, exchanging uncomfortable glances. The tension was thick. Some neighbors tried to speak up in the family's defense, but Karen doubled down, warning that favoritism could not be allowed. As emotions rose, someone pulled out their phone and started recording. The meeting, which had started as just another Tuesday night gathering, was spiraling fast. And the next decision Karen made would change everything, forever. As the phones kept recording, more voices in the room started to rise. One neighbor, a soft-spoken older man, stood up and tried to explain the family's situation, mentioning how the hospital visits had drained their time and energy. But Karen wasn't hearing it. She waved off the explanation, insisting that rules were rules, and that making exceptions would set a dangerous precedent for the entire HOA community. The atmosphere grew even more uncomfortable. Some people shifted in their seats. Others started whispering even louder. It was clear that this wasn't just about a few weeds or a temporary ramp anymore. It had turned into a battle between compassion and control. Behind the scenes, rumors had already started swirling. Some neighbors whispered that Karen had been itching for a fight since she joined the board. Others said she was trying to make an example of the family to push for stricter neighborhood policies. Meanwhile, the family sat quietly at the back of the room, exhausted and stunned, trying to figure out how things had gone so wrong so quickly. A few board members exchanged nervous glances, clearly unsure whether to side with Karen or with the growing crowd of angry residents. As tensions peaked, Karen made one final demand, and within minutes, someone called the police, setting off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The room buzzed with disbelief as Karen, standing stiffly at the front, insisted that the family either pay the mounting fines immediately or face legal action. It wasn't just a warning anymore, it felt like a full-on attack. Cameras caught every second as the parents, still emotionally drained from hospital visits, tried to explain once again, their voices shaking with frustration and sadness. But Karen, clutching the HOA rulebook like a shield, refused to back down. Her face stayed hard, unmoved by the emotions pouring out around her. Then the sound of sirens grew louder outside the building. A few people looked toward the doors, anxiety thick in the air. No one knew exactly what was about to happen, but everyone could feel that the situation was moments away from boiling over. The officers walked in calmly, but the tension was so high, even the smallest movement made people flinch. Karen immediately pointed at one of the family's defenders. Several neighbors started shouting back, some standing between the police and the family, insisting they had done nothing wrong. The officers looked caught off guard, clearly realizing the situation was more complicated than they'd been led to believe. And as the cameras kept rolling, it all raced toward a moment no one would be able to forget. The police officers tried to calm everyone down, but the room had already reached a boiling point. One officer asked Karen to explain exactly what law had been broken, but she kept circling back to HOA rules, waving paperwork in the air as if it were a badge of authority. The crowd grew louder, with people demanding answers and shouting that this was harassment, not law enforcement. The family sat frozen, caught in the middle of the chaos, their faces pale with stress and disbelief. Their friends and neighbors were now stepping up, defending them with raw emotion that made it impossible to ignore the human cost of what was happening. Karen, refusing to let go of her control, pointed again at the father, accusing him of creating a public disturbance. The officer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but before anyone could stop it, he stepped forward toward the father. The room erupted. Foams flew higher into the air, capturing every second as people surged forward, yelling for the police to stop. Several HOA board members tried to intervene, but the damage was already done. The entire meeting was spiraling way beyond anything that could be contained. In that moment, it wasn't just about HOA violations or community rules anymore. It was about right and wrong, compassion versus cold authority, and the next move would decide everything. Just as it seemed the situation couldn't get any worse, a second, unexpected twist hit the room like a thunderclap. One of the newer HOA board members, who had stayed quiet through most of the chaos, suddenly stood up and pulled out a folder. In a shaky voice, she announced that she had documents showing Karen had been selectively enforcing HOA rules, and that other families with much worse violations had been quietly ignored. The room fell dead silent for a split second before exploding into a new wave of shouting and disbelief. Foams swung toward the front of the room as the board member laid out copies of emails and violation reports that never made it to public meetings. It wasn't just the hospitalized child's family that had been targeted. It looked like Karen had been picking and choosing who to punish, possibly holding grudges or using her position for personal reasons. Suddenly, everything made more sense, and people who had once been too scared to speak started yelling their own experiences, sharing stories of unfair treatment and intimidation. The officers, now clearly overwhelmed, pulled back and radioed for backup. Karen's face drained of color, but she stood her ground, insisting the documents were fake. The family, still sitting in the middle of it all, watched as the entire narrative shifted in seconds, and the tension in the room reached a whole new level. As backup officers arrived, the energy in the room was electric, like the whole place was ready to explode. The lead officer, sensing things were way out of hand, asked everyone to settle down so they could sort through the chaos. Meanwhile, the board member who exposed Karen stepped forward, handing the officers the printed emails and evidence. After a few tense minutes of whispered conversations between the police and several HOA members, a decision was made, and it wasn't the one Karen had expected. Instead of arresting the father, the officers turned their attention to Karen. Calmly but firmly, they asked her to step outside for questioning about harassment and possible misuse of authority. The crowd, once frantic, fell into stunned silence before breaking into quiet, nervous applause. Karen, still trying to argue, was led out of the building, her voice trailing off as the doors closed behind her. The family at the center of it all sat there, too drained to celebrate, just quietly holding each other's hands. It finally seemed like the nightmare was over, until the board president, who had stayed mostly silent during the chaos, suddenly stood up and announced that the HOA would be scheduling an emergency vote, not just about Karen, but about dissolving the entire board and starting over. The news hit harder than anyone expected. After everything that had happened, the entire neighborhood now stood at the edge of even bigger changes, and this time, it was the community's turn to decide what kind of future they wanted. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood went through a complete transformation. The emergency HOA meeting took place, and by an overwhelming vote, the board was dissolved. A new committee was elected, made up of residents who promised to lead with fairness and empathy. Karen was officially removed from any future HOA involvement, and the family who had been targeted finally got the support they deserved. Neighbors who barely spoke before now checked in on each other, showing that sometimes, even in the middle of a fight, a community can come out stronger. The family's child eventually returned home from the hospital, greeted by a crowd of neighbors who lined the street with balloons and signs of support. The ramp that once caused so much controversy stayed in place, a symbol of compassion winning out over rigid rules. What started as a story of fines, threats, and a viral arrest became a powerful reminder that standing up for what's right matters, even when it's hard. In the end, the real lesson wasn't just about HOA rules or neighborhood politics. It was about kindness, understanding, and the power of people coming together when it matters most. And for this community, it was a new beginning they wouldn't soon forget.